been some very tough and uncomplimentary things said about the Adult Parole Board of recent months, particularly after Adrian Ernest-Bailey was left on the streets and Jill Maher was killed. Criticisms in the past few days by the former High Court Judge Callanan and his report, from the police as well, from the government as well. That Callanan report said that the culture of the board was wrong, that the system was tilted in favour of criminals and didn't pay enough attention to public safety. I think it's only right and fair that the parole board responds. In the studio with me is Justice Simon Whelan. He's an appeal court judge and was chair of the Adult Parole Board at the time of the Bailey case. He's no longer chair of the board. Justice Whelan, good morning.
Good morning. Thanks for having me, Neil.
Well, thank you for coming. It's estimated 12 people have been killed by parolees since 2008. Is that accurate?
I don't think 12... Well, I don't think 12 is accurate, but really, what difference does it make if one argues what the numbers are? There have been homicides by parolees, and one would be too many, obviously.
But do we know how many?
Look, it's too difficult. Some of them haven't been dealt with. Some of them, one of them committed suicide. There certainly have been 8, I would say. But as I say, I don't really think the numbers are the point.
But is it not a point if we say there have been... And the police said, Ken Lay said to me yesterday, murders, assaults, bashings, kidnappings, thefts, rapes. Is it not a point if we've got perhaps indication we've got a systemic problem if there's a high level of offending by parolees?
Well, there isn't a high level of offending by parolees. I'll tell you what the fundamental issue is. The parole system, as it's operated in Victoria for 50 years, and certainly the time that I was there, has been used as the principal mechanism for the transition of prisoners back into the community. So that in Victoria, we have pretty much used parole as the means of monitoring and supervising returning prisoners. Now, that's not the only way to do it. There's a different theory, which Mr. Callanan contends for in his report, and it's a perfectly valid point of view. Some people hold it, but it's not the only valid point of view. His theory is, no, better to keep them in jail for as long as you can. At least they can't offend while they're in there. And broadly speaking, that's what we colloquially call warehousing, that at least you know they're not offending for the time when they're in there. Those who have a different point of view say yes, but when they get to the end of their term, they walk out the gate, get on a bus and go who knows where and do who knows what, when you have no control over them at all. The other problem is you create a cohort of prisoners inside the prison who have no incentive to do programs, no incentive to be cooperative, because they know they can't get parole, and when the term ends they're walking out the door.
But that's one extreme, no parole. What we're talking, well, nobody's arguing, I don't think it's arguing essentially there shouldn't be parole. Of course there should be parole, but we have to be risk averse, and it would seem...
Well, we are risk averse, but I mean, he says we're not risk averse enough. Mr. Callan, I don't have a problem with the way he's put it. He has said he had an impression that it was tilted. He only sat in on 3 cases, but he didn't contend it was anything more than that he had an impression. And then he says, well, I have a philosophy that with serious violent offenders, better to keep them in jail. And he makes the case for that, and there's no problem as far as I'm concerned about that. Other people make the case for it too. Obviously, victims of crime by parolees are very dedicated to that because it would have avoided their own personal tragedy. But the thing which has prompted me to speak out is that the suggestion that's been made in some quarters that our parole board members don't care about public safety, and that public safety is not their paramount concern. And I have to tell you, that is not true. That is a very false and unfair thing to say about them. Especially people like Judge Jones, Justice Coldry, Darcy Dugan, they have given a lifetime of service to the community. Public safety is their paramount concern. You say to Carmel Arthur public safety is not her paramount concern. That is not true, and that is an insult which none of our members deserve.
But is the weighting wrong? Has there not been enough, this is what Judge Callanan was saying, not enough weighting given to public safety ahead of the criminal's rights?
Well, the criminal's rights don't enter into it. I completely agree with Mr. Callanan about that. The criminal's rights are not a factor in the equation. The issue is, how is public safety best preserved? Now, Mr. Callanan says, and there are others who say it as well, keep them in jail. The alternative view is, better to let them out before the end At least you can hang the rest of the sentence over their head, and you can make them do programs when they're in jail, and you have some control over them when they're out. Not a lot, I accept. We can't follow them 24/7.
That's all true, but we're not talking here about people coming up for parole. We're talking about people breaching parole.
Yeah, well, that's
now,
another
when
issue.
somebody like Bailey comes along, having been drunk and broken a man's jaw, how on earth does his parole continue?
Well, I can tell you how it happened. First of all, it was a mistake, and I've told Tom Maher that with the present chair and with Carmel Arthur, who agreed to come along with me, even though none of us ever actually sat on the Bailey case. The reason it was a mistake, the reason that mistake happened, it seems to me, is this. He pleaded guilty in Geelong Magistrates Court. He was convicted. He was sentenced to 3 months imprisonment. He immediately appealed and applied for bail. The police didn't oppose bail. There was talk about residential conditions and so on, and in the end a decision was made that he should be bailed. So the court made a decision, the police didn't oppose it, that he should remain in the community pending the appeal. Corrections Victoria then wrote to us and they made a request, a written request that we take no action pending the appeal. Now, we should have rejected that request. That man should have been cancelled on the spot. No calling him in. He had pleaded guilty to an assault. It was reckless cause injury. He should have been cancelled. It was a mistake not to do so. But it's the same mistake that Corrections Victoria made. It's the same mistake the police prosecutor made, the same mistake the magistrate made. Now, we obviously have to take more responsibility than them because we're the ones who are the ultimate decision makers.
Can you explain how the mistake was made?
Well, it wasn't treated seriously enough, frankly, is my analysis of the file. It was looked upon as an administrative, almost a scheduling issue, rather than an issue about whether he had become an unacceptable risk. There was a failure on our part and a failure on Corrections Victoria's part to identify the fact, which I must say in retrospect I think is pretty clear, that he was an unacceptable risk. And I mean, there was some controversy, I know, on your program the other day, because I do always listen to you, Neil, when I can, about us not calling him in.
Yeah, the minister confirmed that.
And that would have been a very inappropriate thing to do. To call him in to reiterate his conditions, which was what was suggested in January, would have been an entirely inappropriate way to deal with that matter. If we called him in just to reiterate his conditions, is that the end of it then? The man then gets convicted of an assault in the following month. He shouldn't have been called in. He should have been cancelled on the spot. There was nothing to call him in about or talk to him about. He could have been seen in prison after he'd been cancelled, which is the normal thing we do. And
so
that's what should have happened.
He wasn't called in to front the board?
No, because...
But he was allowed out?
No, in January, while he was still awaiting the hearing, Corrections said, call him in to reiterate the conditions. Well, frankly, the board was completely correct, the board that dealt with that, to not do that. They said, let's wait and see what happens in February, and that was the right decision.
Was
the
he
wrong
called in
decision.
No. He was called in any stage?
Because it was treated as if it was a scheduling matter. The Corrections wrote to us and said, oh, well, the appeal will be on relatively soon. Don't do anything till the appeal is heard. We didn't decide not to cancel him. We decided not to consider it while the appeal was pending. Now, that was not the right decision. He should have been cancelled on the spot. He can do his appeal while he's in jail. If that's the course he wanted to take.
I was going back to the questions Tom Maher was asking publicly, and I know you've met him privately, and that's a very good thing that's happened. But I thought they're reasonable. What kind of was there any assessment process made of his danger?
Yeah,
at
there
this
was.
stage? Given it was a scheduling issue, was there no assessment made of him?
I don't think there was an adequate assessment made of it. No. When I went through the file, there were other things that caused me concern, which when I went back through the Corrections Victoria reports, I thought there was a failure, and it's our failure too, of course, because we read the reports, to identify the fact that there was an escalating risk situation there. But you've got to remember this, Neil.
Sorry, I don't quite understand that. Was it in the file there was an indication of an escalating risk?
Not the sort of indications that I've seen reported in the press, which are absurdly exaggerated. But yeah, there were things that happened. I took Tom through these. There were things that had happened which, were ominous, I thought. He'd had arguments with girlfriends and things. There was the breakdown with his mother, which was one of the main reasons why he got parole, because he had the ability to live with his mother. Although the way the breakdown was reported to us was certainly not as a warning. But look, the government's known all of this right from the day one. The very first thing that happened after he was arrested was the Premier asked for all of the Corrections Victoria reports, and they were sent to his office. And I talked to Minister McIntosh about it.
You provided a report to him, didn't you? Or was it a verbal one?
I provided, I wrote an analysis in November, which I gave to the Commissioner for Corrections, which she read. She gave me hers, which I read. We each wanted to make sure we hadn't missed anything. I talked to Minister McIntosh about it at length, and he was completely across the detail. And I told him what I'd found, and I told him what I thought about it.
And what you found is what you're expressing here.
Yes, and what I told Tom Maher. Minister McIntosh, he then came back to me in January, and he said, all right, this is what we're going to do. We're going to introduce this legislation. And I had to say to him, well, I think it's appropriate in the circumstances given what's happened. A man who should have been cancelled wasn't cancelled. Well, all right, let's remove that issue once and for all, which is what he did. The Commissioner for Corrections also, she addressed it, she took it very seriously, as you would expect, particularly the fact that there was a request made that his that cancellation be deferred considering the pending the appeal, and there's a lot of detailed analysis done by her, which I felt pretty much addressed the issues fairly well, but Ian Callinan's now produced a raft of further recommendations, nearly all of which I would enthusiastically endorse, but it's going to take a lot of money to implement these recommendations.
I wonder if we get to that in a moment. I take your point that one death is enough, but I keep getting back to the systemic situation here. Are we going to hear more stories of similar errors that have led to deaths or serious injuries?
Well, I hope not. Professor Ogloff, you will have seen reference to that in Ian Callinan's report, Mr. Callinan's report. He did an excellent analysis of what had gone wrong in these cases, and he produced a raft of recommendations. Now, with the exception of some information sharing things, which we did implement straight away, they're all directed at Corrections Victoria for this reason, if you'll just indulge me for a minute. The Adult Parole Board has 19 staff in total, from the boss to the very lowest person. 19 staff is what we have. We have a budget of $3 million a year. We have 23 members, really only 22 because one's the secretary of the department. They're all part-timers except for two. We are a tiny organisation sitting off to the side of the huge organisation that is Corrections Victoria and the Department of Justice. We don't do any of the compilation of information or the analysis of material or the risk assessments. We don't do any of that. That's all done within Corrections Victoria. They present it to us, we make a decision. Professor Ogloff's analysis is entirely focused on that Corrections Victoria side of the equation. How are risk assessments being done? What's the tool that's being used? Is that satisfactory? What are the offending behaviour programs? How are they being managed, and so on and so on. A lot of his recommendations would be very expensive to implement, and you would have to ask the Commissioner for Corrections, but I'm sure that's an inhibition in their implementation.
Okay, but you're telling me that you're under-resourced, and that's part of the problem.
Absolutely.
I have been, and that's part of the reason this is happening.
I think it probably is.
Did you ask for more money when you were chair? Or
Look,
more resource?
I wish I had. I can't say that I did. Judge Jones and Justice Coldry both came to me separately on occasions and said, look, this workload has become untenable. I didn't go to the Minister about it until not long before my term finished. I didn't go to the Minister about it until April. I wish I had. I must say, I don't believe it would have made any difference. In the public sector, everybody believes they don't have enough money to do what they should be doing. And frankly, as Tom Maher said to me, well, he said, why does it take a crisis to bring about change? And it's a very, very good point. But I'm afraid in the public sector, the reality is that you don't get much of a hearing if you're just whinging about money. What you get told to do is do the best you can with what you've got, and that's what we did, rightly or wrongly.
Have you seen a report by Detective Sergeant Ron Iddles on murders by parolees?
I haven't seen that one, no.
Have you seen a report by Superintendent Sharon Cowden on the same thing?
No, I haven't.
This was on the issue the police had of a number of parolees killing and a flagging of the warning
yes. So this is in early 2011. Yeah, look, I never got the police reports, but I think I was given a pretty full briefing of what the issue was. Certainly Corrections Victoria spent a lot of time and effort addressing that, and we did too. the information exchange arrangements before, I think we really started in 2010, were unsatisfactory, but I think that's I think that's been rectified.
Ken Lay said to me yesterday there is no way we can guarantee there won't be mistakes in the future that cost innocent lives in this system. Do you agree?
I don't think there's any way any part of the justice system can guarantee that there won't be mistakes made that cost innocent lives. It's inherent in the nature of what we're doing. You know, especially in parole, the Adult Parole Board is dealing with the 1,600 men, and as Mr. Callanan says, they're mainly men, the 1,600 who are probably the most risky of all. Now, you've got two options. You can lock them away in the expectation that at least you're keeping them off the streets for a while, or you can try to manage the risk. In the past, we've tried to manage the risk. The government will now have to decide how it's going to be done in the future.
About over 35% of released offenders are back in prison within 2 years. And that says the system isn't working, doesn't it?
No, I don't think so. In fact, that represents the fact that we have become increasingly risk averse. I think, contrary to what Mr. Callanan says, is particularly over my time and Justice Curtin's time. When I came into the parole board, we were cancelling about 150 parolees a year. This is back in 2008. We're tracking to cancel 800 this year. Now, I don't put that forward as a matter of pride, but I do put it forward as an illustration of the fact that we have become increasingly risk averse rather than the contrary. And look, I would have said before all of this that that system works. Let them out and bring them back when you become concerned. But as the Bailey case illustrates, that's all premised on the proposition that they do get brought back when they should. Should
the board, make of the board, be changed significantly to include perhaps fewer judges, more victims or police?
Well, I agree really with what Mr. Callanan says about that. He seems to think the judges' participation is very important, and I think that's probably why. I think we probably need to look at whether sitting judges should be on it. I don't think it's a very satisfactory position I've been put in now, where I have to effectively enter into the political debate about it, and I don't like doing that.
I'm told that members of the board felt they were abandoned by government. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think it probably is fair. But it's a very difficult situation, and it's not about us, Neil. It's about the people who have paid the real price for the things that have happened.
Is there a feeling of, what is the emotion amongst the board members? Is it guilt? Is it... do people... and who sat
no, it's not guilt.
Can we say who sat on that board, the Bailey board?
Oh, well, a lot of us sat on it. There'd probably be 17 of the members. It was hard to find people who hadn't sat on Bailey when we were going to meet Tom Maher, which is one of the reasons why Carmel Arthur came. Also because of her personal situation, it was thought she would be sympathetic and...
Carmel Arthur, I should explain, lost her husband.
Yeah.
Police officer shot out in Moorabbin.
Yeah. But Carmel had never sat on Bailey's case, and neither had Justice Curtin or I, but I think almost everybody else at one point or another had. Because
how do they feel?
They feel that the community doesn't understand how difficult these decisions are, and they feel that the community has been told that the problem arises because they don't care about public safety, and they feel very upset that nobody has been prepared to stand up and say that is not true. But the reality of life these days seems to be that the politicians are not prepared to take that kind of course, so I'm in the situation where I've had to do it, which I don't think is satisfactory, and why I agree with Mr. Callanan's recommendation that the next, or the chair after Justice Curtin should be someone who can be full-time, and also someone who's able to go into bat and with the government for resources and so on, someone who can really be, well, a bit more of a politician than either I or Justice Curtin can be.
You and the board members have copped a pasting over recent months, some of it from me, I'll say, and you seem to have addressed it here, but is there anything else you wanted to add to it?
Oh, I don't think so. Look, I would just say one last thing. I saw a report in The Age that the Corrections Minister and the Premier had said that Mr. Callinan's reforms can be introduced without cost by administrative arrangements or some such thing, that I don't think that is a realistic approach. If Mr. Callinan's recommendations are to be implemented, as they should be, I don't include recommendation 5 on that because that's a political issue about what the test should be, but the other recommendations, and if Professor Ogloth's recommendations are to be implemented, as they should be, it will take a lot of money. There's no getting away from that. You're not going to be able to do it for free, and you're not going to be able to do it by jiggling the arrangements around a bit. It's going to take substantial resources, and I think that has to be recognised.
Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Neil.
Justice Simon Whelan, who was head of the Parole Board, 2008 to 13.